psychological insights. Is the psychological well-being of a person, is that a personal thing? After all, when we go to psychologists, we go with our personal problems. Or is the psychological well-being of a person really determined by the world he lives in, by the politicians, by leaders, by what's going on in the world? How much of it is it personal and how much is it collective? Today, we'll be speaking to Dr. Robert Ham. He's a psychologist in West Hartford Center. I'm Pat Kazikoff. Stay with me. Hello, Dr. Ham.
Good morning there, Pat.
So what is this all about? This is really a different way of looking at the psychological well-being of a person.
Yes, today's topic is malice, apathy, the meaning of psychological health in a shrinking world. So what I'm proposing today in our talk is that we have, I think we are compelled, we meaning we psychologists, to look at the disorders that we identify in our taxonomy of mental disorders. You may have heard of the DSM. That's the Bible of the American Psychiatric Association. And it's a catalog of mental disorders. It's always been founded on this idea that disorders are something that has to do with individuals, something people have. They're mental disorders. That's how it's defined. I'm proposing that in the world that we live in today, that we redefine how we define ourselves in our relationships. And the reason for that is that the world is shrinking and it is calling us to deal with our planet, our relationships, and this also has ramifications for how we see ourselves.
But is that any different? That's historic. In any historical context, you have world issues, Second World War, Vietnam War, the colonial era. Those are all eras and they produce their own issues. But does that really change the person's issues? Are you saying that it does?
Yes, I mean, the world has always had issues, wars, as you're saying, or calamities and diseases and things like that, and climate problems. But I think that today is unique in that it's shrinking. We live in a world now, we live in a globe that we know what it looks like, we know what it is, we have access to one another within hours, even far reaches of the globe. So our understandings and our behaviors, our political actions, the way that we treat the planet, our telecommunication system makes the world a very small place. We are now a small community. Anything that any one culture does has an impact on the rest of the world. We've never, unless we start, space travel, which we are starting now, and start to inhabit other planets, we're in a much smaller place.
So you're saying that being in the smaller place is a huge determining factor of the psychological well-being of the people.
We're going to have to learn how to better take care of the planet and get along with one another if we are to survive. I mean, that goes without saying, doesn't it?
So before I mentioned, I mentioned some world calamities, the Second World War, the colonial era, Vietnam War. What would you say are some, I'm going to call it calamities for want of a better word, what would you say are some of the calamities that are affecting our psychological well-being and that are unique to this particular era?
Well, all you have to do is pick up a newspaper, to know, right?
Are you talking about the political situation?
That's one of them. Yes, absolutely. I think that we are in a world crisis with politics, as well as here in the United States. Yeah, but of course, the pandemic, it goes without saying, doesn't it? And the other huge thing on the horizon, in fact, it's not on the horizon, it's here, climate change. It's here even faster than we, so there aren't too many, I hope, climate deniers today. These are crises. They're not just problems, and they affect all of us together. So if one country, let's say, fails to deal with its pollution problems, it doesn't affect just that country that people live in. It doesn't. It affects everybody. Um, and the pandemic, it's a pandemic because we are able to take an airline flight to any place and get somewhere. So it spreads like wildfire. So everything that we do now is compounded. And so it just forces us to look at the ramifications um, of our actions.
So you're saying that this era has its very unique issues, unique to this era, one being the pandemic, two being the political situation, the climate change, shrinking resources. But how exactly does that affect the personal well-being of a person? Like, does anyone ever walk into your office, I'm being tongue-in-cheek, and say, hi, we got shrinking resources here and there's climate change? Like, does anybody ever present with that?
Uh, no, but I think that we're all affected by social media that tells us that we're in this situation. So yes, my answer to that question is yes, to indirectly, people are affected, their psychological well-being, their mental health, whether it's depression, anxiety, is affected by all. It's not the only thing. You could be having problems with your job or whatnot, but the world situation is affecting everyone, and it does contribute to mental health problems. Yes, I am seeing it in my office. I was just telling a colleague yesterday, I've never seen so many patients who are concerned about death, for example.
Well, could that be because of the age, where the boomer generation is the largest? There's more old people than there ever were. Could that be the reason?
Yeah, I don't see old people in my practice. I'm the oldest.
You're the oldest person.
I'm the oldest. Right.
So how old are these people who are preoccupied with dying? Like, what's the age range?
Well, you mean who do I see in my practice?
Well, who, like, you're noticing a problem that's coming up.
People of all ages. People of all ages are concerned. Young people to old people to middle age. It doesn't. We're all affected by it. I mean, young people are affected too. They see, oh well, and should I start a family? Is this the world that I want my children into? They're very concerned. Or am I going to be able to get a job or a career? The economy. And everybody is affected by this shrinking world that we're living in many ways.
So what can you do? I mean, what can you do about that? I mean, it's what permeates the world.
Well, I can't do a lot. I'm just a psychologist. I think maybe that's a rhetorical question. I'm kind of joking, but if I take your question literally, that's the reason for my topic today, is what can a psychologist do? What can we, as a field of psychology, do to address the problems in a shrinking world? What is our role in that? So I feel that we can take, as practitioners, we should be aware of how our patients are being affected by the world situation, um, as well as getting involved in political causes if need be, if that's what we feel compelled to do. I think we all have a responsibility to take care of our communities and our planet. But I believe that as a field of practice, we also, I think, should take a look at how we conceptualize mental disorders, because we tend to, our tradition is to see them as um, situated within an individual, bounded by the individual self. I'm using a term Edward Sampson, the late psychologist, used in an article he had published back in the late 80s um, on indigenous psychologies of the individual and ensemble individualism. His Sampson was an interesting person. He came up with creative ideas to deal with modern problems at a conceptual level. And he proposed that we reconceptualize how we view what the self is, how we define the self, to deal with problems that have to do with conflict and strife and identity politics. So he suggested we extend our definition of the self, what he called the ensembled individualism. And so that who we identify with is more than our own individual selves, but incorporates the world around us, the people around us, our communities. For what purpose? For us to address the social problems that exist
So how
in a
would you,
shrinking world.
how
Yeah.
would, how, given that that would be sort of a way of approaching a practice, psychological practice, how would that change how you deal with people? Given
Well,
your
yeah,
new definition, how would you change your practice?
well, it would. The purpose of my proposing that we reconceptualize mental disorders is something that goes beyond our individual selves. Is that so that people identify, and therefore, because they identify with problems outside themselves, people outside themselves, other cultures, by defining it problems as having more of a moral dimension to it, that rather than dealing with these problems as, so how do we deal with moral issues? It's traditionally two ways, either with religion. Religion gives us codes to live by, to treat, others well, and our criminal justice system, that deals with moral issues in a legal and penal way. Um, so, so it's uses religion, which doesn't have the same power that it used to have. Religion is at least in organized religion is losing a lot of its influence on society and people. And our criminal justice system is punitive. So it does not incorporate a psychological dimension. So by extending our understanding of what the self is and our taxonomy of mental disorders to incorporate this dimension of moral behavior, the purpose is to regulate these kinds of problems, because we are now faced with a crisis in how we deal with the other, that it would be regulated more on the basis of empathy, because we are identifying more than with our own kind or with our own personal concerns, but take on naturally a sense of empathy, concern, and thereby a sense of responsibility that therefore is regulated in a more natural way, as opposed to force or fear.
So what I'm hearing from you is that if the person defines their problem more as not a personal problem, but sort of a result of living in this world plus a personal dimension. If they define it that way, that they're more apt to sort of have a better understanding of how they got to this place, that it's not just them, that it's a bigger picture. Is that what you're expressing?
Yes, yes, it is part of it. Yes, it also helps us to understand that we are all part of this world. That I know that you have a different perspective than I do personally, and as a psychologist, about the sources of the origins of our psychological problems to some degree. So
Could
this.
you tell me what my origin is? I'm not quite clear. It's the first time I'm hearing this. All of a sudden, I have another origin. Where's my origin? Please share this with me.
You're not being disingenuous?
A little, just a little.
Okay.
But I figured you could take it. You're the psychologist.
Right. So I think that it helps for us to understand that who we are and who we are beholden to is greater than our own personal experiences, our own individual selves. That we are part of something greater, a spiritual dimension, if you will, what we call spirituality, which I think is starting to gain greater power in how people see the world, as opposed to organized religion or dogmatic ideas. So that's.
So are you in practice? Do you suggest that your patients adopt a spirituality component to their lives? Is that part of your practice?
No, I don't never suggest anyone, least of all my patients, adopt a spiritual perspective. But I do work with spiritual issues if a patient wants to work on that. That said, I do have it always in mind in how I conceptualize a person's problems, in addition to the organic and the more Freudian kind of personal kinds of experiences and the psychodynamics. I also have in mind, as I'm working with a patient, that we're part of a greater world that, as I was saying earlier, affects all of us in various ways. And by the same token, we have a responsibility to that world. We have a responsibility to others, and that it is healing. It's ameliorative to our mental health to address it, rather than to proceed with our, like an ostrich with its head in the sand, with apathy or denial of its existence.
I can see, I must admit, I'm listening and I was a little bit skeptical at the beginning of this topic, but I can see how defining one's problem in a broader context can be helpful to a human being, because they're basically reacting to the world and it's coming out in this problem, whatever it is. But for them to understand that this is their reaction to the world, and it doesn't have to be their reaction, that the world is big and it's strong, but they can take some control also. That's what I'm hearing when I'm listening to you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's certainly empowerment in helping people to realize that in order to overcome all of the feelings of being overwhelmed and helpless, and that even though you're one person, you can have an effect. I think, but by the same token, I wanted to also bring up that, what I am proposing in this extension of how we conceptualize mental disorders, and we also look at the responsibility that society has to address these issues, and that we should not ignore that they're responsible. In other words, what is the state of the mental health, if you would, of our society, our culture that we live in? That should be part and parcel of our judgments about how individuals are doing mentally. I'm proposing that we extend our understanding of mental disorders, not only with respect to incorporating this moral dimension of individual behavior and mentality, if you will, but also to take into consideration the contribution of our society and our culture that contributes to this state of mind.
Well, well expressed, well expressed.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just thinking, when you first announced the topic, one of the words in your topic was malice. How does malice play into all this?
Well, frankly, when I first started writing this article, our show is always an offshoot of my blog. It was going to be about malice. And as I was writing it, I found I was more veering off into a broader sort of topic, which has to do with a project that I've been involved, off and on in through much of my career. So I published a couple of articles a number of years ago in the Psychoanalytic Review that addresses this issue. It is something that I have been, sort of mulling over for some time.
And the malice part of it, where is that coming
Thanks
in?
for bringing me back to malice is the moral dimension. So I started with this idea of malice because I wanted to talk about that in a more dimensional way. That is, what are the different degrees of malice? Maybe we need to look at that. It is part of a spectrum of problems, mental or behavioral disorders. But I see it as something that is sort of endemic to the world we're living in. There's a more hostile world that we're living in. So that there's either a lot more tension and strife, such as what's happening here in the United States right now culturally. There's a culture war going on, but also apathy, which is another form of, I think, morality that manifests in a different way, by putting our head in the sand, so to speak. So looking at how we conceptualize culpability, malice, we can in the criminal justice system they conceptualize it on a spectrum from the degree to which behavior is purposeful to one that is negligent
Or premeditated. There's different levels.
Yeah, that's right. So
Right.
Either purposeful or one that is one conscious of, even if it is purposeful, or reckless, or just plain negligent. But it's all part of the same spectrum of criminality or malice that the criminal justice system deals with. And I think this is a dimension that should be given greater emphasis in our taxonomy system of mental disorders. Psychology is a part of the criminal justice system. It has been incorporated for many years. I have been a consultant years ago in the criminal justice system, asked to help in making determinations about whether one is competent to stand trial. I've been given many referrals by the court system to help address behavioral problems associated with violent crimes, domestic violence, things of that nature. So psychology already has been integrated into the criminal justice system. What I'm suggesting is that we as psychologists now start to incorporate more of criminality, morality. It has to do with malice and apathy along the spectrum of criminality, criminal intent, malice.
Well, what I'm hearing from you is that you're going to have a full-time job for many, many more years. There's a lot of trouble out there. The world's not going away. The big problems, the climate change, the political leaders, none of that is going away. So you're assured that there's going to be a lot of people with a lot of problems, and your job is not going to be put on the back burner. That's what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear. I don't want to be put out to pasture.
No,
And
you're not going to be put out to pasture. I'm listening to you, and with this new broader definition of mental health and how it affects the person, you've got a big body of knowledge there, and a lot of people. You once told me in one of our sessions that you've busier than you've ever been in your life.
yes, and I think that again, to the point of this, the topic of today's discussion, it's a little bit ahead of the game. Reconceptualizing I think the change is very slow. So I don't expect that it's going to change how mental health practitioners, are going to conceptualize anytime soon. Um, However, I do think that it can catch on and is needed. And an example of that reconceptualization, how it has taken place in another area, is with respect to identity, is in sexual identity and identity politics. Who would have imagined today, 50 years ago, I should say, that today that sexual identity is defined such as non-binary sexual identity in a totally different way. It would be unthinkable 50 years ago. So how the self is defined in that dimension has taken place, even though it would have been incomprehensible years ago. And I think the same would apply with this topic.
Well, you make a lot of very important points, and I'm seeing this new way of looking at the psychological well-being of a person. I think probably the way you relate it to the sexual politics, this too will change. But we're running out of time, and we can't talk about all the changes that are coming up. So thank you very much, Dr. Ham, as always, for a very interesting topic and a new way of looking at what psychology, the practice of psychology, is all about.
Yeah, thank you.